Featured Artist Lecture Series. We want to particularly thank Adam and Melanie Lewis and Rebecca Donaldson and Toby Lewis, all for sponsoring Sanford Biggers today. I am so excited about the lineup of teachers who we have here, the faculty this week, and throughout the summer, the featured artists. It is, as I hope you realize, quite a roundup. We hope you'll all come to all of them, and do come early because we're still a little bit early in June. But by July, this will be full, and we'll have to be putting people in the cafe to watch it through there. It is with the greatest of pleasure that I introduce Sanford Biggers. He's a cross-disciplinary artist who works in video, film, photography, installation, sculpture, music, and performance. And I think his students, how many of his students are here? Well, they all got up at 5:30 this morning to walk to Crater Lake and Maroon Bell. So we commend you, but I think they're all having a hell of a time. Sanford is an LA native. He's lived and worked in New York City since 1999. He received a BA from Morehouse College and an MFA from the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. Biggers' work references, I'm going to have to read this whole list: African American ethnography, hip-hop music, Buddhism, African spirituality, Indo-European Voodoo, jazz, Afrofuturism, urban culture, and icons from Americana, as well as just about anything else. A great deal of humor, some sarcasm, and a real blending of cultures and really looking at other cultures and how they intersect with each other. He says his themes are meant to broaden and complicate our read of American history. In order to make the viewer an active element, Biggers' work is often performative. Having spent most of his life playing the piano, he's collaborated on music projects with a number of well-known performers. Biggers first received critical attention with the legendary exhibition Freestyle at the Studio Museum in Harlem. Since then, his works have been presented internationally, including the Tate Modern in London, the Renaissance Society in Chicago, Prospect One in New Orleans, where he was one of the hits of the exhibition, the Whitney Biennial, the Kitchen, Performa, a major installation at Mass MoCA, and this year, a concurrent show between the Brooklyn Museum and the Sculpture Center in Queens, as well as having installations in China, Germany, Hungary, Japan, Poland, and Russia. In 2009, he received the William H. Johnson Prize and was one of 3 finalists for the inaugural Jack Woolgan International Competition, which is the largest juried prize in the world going to an individual artist. And he recently was awarded the Berlin Prize by the American Academy. Biggers is an affiliate faculty at the Virginia Commonwealth University Sculpture and Expanded Media Program, was a visiting scholar at Harvard University's VES department in 2009, and is presently assistant professor at Columbia University's Visual Arts Program. And it is with great affection and pride that I introduce Sanford Biggers.
How long was this speak? All right. 1, 2, 1, 2. Is this thing on? How's everyone doing? Great. All right. Good to see all you faces here. Some of us have been up bright and early, already done our 4-mile hike. Now we're ready to settle into the day. So I want to thank, of course, the Anderson Ranch and Barbara and Mariana and the whole staff here for having me and these great instructors and artists here. I also want to thank my class, which is called Variations on a Theme, but I think I will give it a DBA name now. So now it is doing business as the Elevated Research Group. So props to you guys. We have a lot of stuff to go through. And I'm going to be jumping back and forth between old work, very old work, and very new work. So excuse me if I seem a little scattered. Basic background, I was born and raised in Los Angeles, went to school in Atlanta, Georgia, and then moved to Japan for 3 years, where I got very interested in Buddhism, traveled extensively throughout Asia, and then moved back to the US, and eventually got to grad school. But in the interim, had spent time doing music pre-production in Los Angeles, performing as a musician in New York and Chicago and San Francisco, and a whole myriad of other things before I finished grad school, moved to New York to do the Studio Museum residency and PS1 residency, and I've been there ever since. So rather than me keep talking about the background, I'll intersperse it throughout the rest of the talk, but I'd like to show you a few clips of things. The first is a documentary that just is coming out right now. It just got screened at the Brooklyn Museum. I'll just show you the trailer to that. And after that, I will show you what I like to consider a video diary, which will take you a little deeper into the way I think about the world and the way I put elements and ideas aesthetically, sonically, and artistically together. So if we can have the lights.
Sanford Biggers is over 6 feet tall. He smiles regularly. He paints sculptures and quilts. He occasionally fabricates drawings, trinkets, mythology, fucking lies, because he's a fucking magician. He melts his last idea and casts a newer, uglier, lovelier one. He introduces himself in a reductive way. When I met him, I asked him his name and he said,
"My name is Sanford Biggers, and I am an artist."
I was not satisfied with that. The words were too small for his...
Okay.
The unknown is eternal because you will never know what it is all about.
The unknown is eternal because you will never know what it is all about.
Your wisdom will be when you say, I do not know.
Your wisdom will be when you say, I do not know.
Your ignorance will be your salvation.
Your ignorance will be your salvation.
There is a fifth dimension, beyond that which is known to man. It is a dimension as vast as space and as timeless as infinity. It is the middle ground between light and shadow, between science and superstition, and it lies between the pit of man's fears and the summit of his knowledge. This is the dimension of imagination. It is an area which we call
One moment, please. Ooh.
I don't have to tell you things are bad. Everybody knows things are bad. It's a depression. Everybody's out of work or scared of losing their job. The dollar buys a nickel's worth. Banks are going bust. Shopkeepers keep a gun under the counter. Punks are running wild in the street, and there's nobody anywhere who seems to know what to do, and there's no end to it. We know the air is unfit to breathe, and our food is unfit to eat. We sit watching our TVs while some local newscaster tells us that today we had 15 homicides and 63 violent crimes, as if that's the way it's supposed to be. We know things are bad, worse than bad. They're crazy. It's like everything everywhere is going crazy, so we don't go out anymore. We sit in the house, and slowly the world we're living in is getting smaller, and all we say is, please, at least leave us alone in our living rooms. Let me have my toaster and my TV and my steel-belted radios, and I won't say anything. Just leave us alone. Well, I'm not going to leave you alone. I want you to get mad. I don't want you to protest. I don't want you to riot. I don't want you to write to your congressman because I wouldn't know what to tell you to write. I don't know what to do about the depression and the inflation and the Russians and the crime in the street. All I know is that first, you've got to get mad. You've got to say, I'm a human being. God damn it. My life has value. So, I want you to get up now. I want all of you to get up out of your chairs. I want you to get up right now and go to the window, open it, and stick your head out and yell, I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not going to take this anymore. I want you to get up right now. Get up, go to your windows, open them, and stick your head out and yell, I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not going to take this anymore. Then we'll figure out what to do. But first, you've got to get mad. You've got to say, I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not going to take this anymore. Then we'll figure out what to do. But first, you've got to get mad. You've got to get angry. You've got to go out and say, I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not going to take this anymore. Then we'll figure it out. First, you've got to get mad. You've got to say, I'm a human being, God damn it. I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not going to take this anymore.
Cousins, I want you all to go to your windows.
Open them up.
Go to your windows and yell out, I'm tired of the drugs. I'm tired of the crack babies born out of wedlock to crackhead aid-infested parents. I'm tired of the inflated welfare rolls while good homes-some Americans bring less and less of their paycheck home every 2 weeks.
And that's a long time, too.
I'm tired. You're tired. We're all tired of all these so-called Bible thumping,
Swing down, swing low.
God-fearing,
GP, are you with me?
whore-moggling, professional athletes.
You the fine motherfucker, baby. Back that ass up.
Cousins, I want you to go to your windows. Yell out. Scream with all the life you can muster up inside your bruised and battered, assaulted bodies. I'm sick and tired of niggas, and I'm not gonna take it anymore!
That boy something else. Once he get to talking, Lord have mercy, he done did it again.
History Week.
Well, Sweet Daddy Williams is black.
But you should be painting someone more relevant to black history.
Relevant? Are you jiving?
Figure 8 is double 4. at the Yale Howard game. Girl, I saw your beaver flash. I'll never be the same. Oh no.
You gave me a soul kiss. Boy, it sure was grand. You gave me a dry hump behind the hot dog stand. Oh, yeah.
I used to have pimples, but I made them disappear.
He faced life with face off. It made his skin so clear.
Don't care what you may say, we got that attitude. Don't care what you may do, we got that attitude. We got that BMA. We got that BMA. Don't care what you may think, we got that attitude. Don't care what you may do, we got that attitude. Got that BMA. We got that BMA. Don't care what you may think, we got that attitude. Don't care what you may do, we got that attitude.
The center of the mandala brings to mind the configuration of Mount Kailash, believed by many to be the center of the physical and spiritual universe. We asked the Dalai Lama for his views on this.
But then you should question whether Mount Kailash is the center of the universe. That I don't know. Each country, they believe, you see, their own country is the center of the whole universe. I think that's very true. I think ultimately, we ourselves, one individual, that is the center of the universe. So for me, this place is the center of the universe because the conception of the whole universe come from here. So therefore, I'm the center of the universe. So similarly, your case, you are the center of the whole universe.
Thank you. It makes me feel very good. I shouldn't tell my wife.
Put your hands together, clap soft. Soul Train went down Cornelius. Soul Train went down Cornelius. And let me hear everybody say, where all the brothers and sisters get together. Say it, where all the brothers and sisters get together. Say it loud, where all the brothers and sisters get together. Stop right there. I'm telling you, people, for your information. Soul Train down
Come on and do it with us again next week on these same stations, and you can bet your last money it's all gonna be a stone gas, honey. I'm Don Cornelius, and as always in parting, we wish you love, peace, and soul.
This has been a Don Cornelius production.
ああ、面白かった。やっぱり室内アンテナにすると映りが違うね。やっぱりね。
Okay. I know that was a lot to sort of ingest, but I hope it makes you a little bit more confused. I mentioned that I lived in Japan for a while. This would have been from 1992 to 1995. And while I was there, I got very interested in Buddhism and a lot of the signifiers and objects from Buddhism, including mandalas and tankas and so on, but particularly the mandalas. And when I returned back to the States some years later and I started to go through the grad school process, I was actually in Baltimore, Maryland at MICA doing a post-bac, and one of my instructors told me to explore the notion of autobiography. And so I started to figure out ways to do that, and working in sculpture or installation at the time, it was a way of embedding the work with parts of autobiography without necessarily using the signifier of myself, my portrait, my body. And growing up in Los Angeles, I grew up in the high time of, it wasn't even hip hop yet, rap culture. So we're talking like 79, 80, early 80s. And everyone in the neighborhood had a B-boy or B-girl talent, meaning you either did graffiti, you were an MC, or you were breakdancing, or you were a DJ. I dabbled in a little bit of all that, but specifically breakdancing. And me and my group, we used to have this sort of ritual, almost like a dojo. We'd go to a friend's house and we'd practice and we'd stretch and we'd exchange moves and we'd have mock battles, and then we'd go to Venice Beach on the weekends and try to make money by battling other groups. So when I thought about autobiography, while taking all the experiences in Japan, I landed on making mandalas. So I started to make these floor-based mandalas, and this came about when I was reading, doing a little research, and it turns out that some monks, rather than even creating a mandala, they memorize the patterns, and they actually dance and make movements that recreate the mandala in space. And they do this through circular motions, which made me think, obviously, of breakdancing in circular motion as well. And Busby Berkeley films, which were shot from overhead with all those circular kaleidoscopic dance choreography that he used to use. So this was the first of the mandalas that I made. This is around 16 feet by 16 feet. And this is all hand-cut rubber tiles. And I recently started looking at my work, and in addition to all the things that Barbara mentioned that are infused in my work, there is obviously a pop element. And my interest in pop is not necessarily, candy apple red and shiny, but pop in terms of materials that were popular in the 70s, 60s, even late 50s, like industrial linoleum floors that would be in hospitals and government buildings and elementary schools and so on. So I started to construct these, and then I would take them out. So this would have been around 2000, and I just finished grad school in Chicago, and I moved to New York. And for my final project for PS1, I collaborated with the Battle of the Boroughs, which is an annual breakdance, DJ, graffiti, MC competition that's held in either the Bronx or Brooklyn or sometimes downtown Manhattan. And I put this floor in as the official floor for that event. So all the breakdancers there, they just looked at this as a stage, a very elaborate stage for them to perform on. They didn't know about the quote-unquote artistic side of this endeavor. So secretly, I put a camera above the floor and videotaped the whole event. And then later, I disclosed to a lot of the dancers what actually was filmed and invited them to come to my opening at PS1. And they could perform on the piece if they wanted to, or they could just be there because obviously the video was playing and I wanted them to sort of be able to see themselves in a different context. And at the same time, bring that demographic into PS1 and later to museums around the world, which this floor has traveled. And to give you an idea of the kind of crowd that was there was probably close to 400 people. And it was extremely international, a large age range because some of the original B-boys and B-girls at this time were probably in their mid-40s, all the way to their children who were tots. And they were all just hanging out. And interesting thing, a lot of people thought breakdancing died when it was no longer on television. But in fact, it just went abroad like many other things that are created in urban centers in the US, and it flourished. And it only was resurrected after several of the judges of this event, who are from the Rocksteady crew and the New York City Breakers, the original famous groups from New York, were asked to judge a contest in Germany. And when they went there, they saw breakdancers from India and China and all over the world, and then they realized they didn't even have a contest back in New York. So they came back to New York and started the Battle of the Boroughs. So there is an international antidote to the end of this whole project. And I went and dug in some of my crates to find some other pieces that led up to that. And I'll just try to show a couple very fast. Excuse the format here, but I did several of these dance floors. The largest one was 16 feet by 16 feet. This one is 7 feet by 7 feet. And I started to silk screen images that I got from old school breakdance posters. And I started to make my own dancing gods, my own Shivas, that are like 6-arm and 8-arm breakdancers. So you see one doing a head spin right there. Let's see if this one was also first shown in Chicago. This one has, I think there's a detail of this, where once again you can see that sort of Shiva-like figure. This is Frosty Freeze, for anyone who wants to know. It says it on his nameplate. And this is one of the pieces, it was recently shown in Amsterdam and in London at the Innova Gallery. And these are some dancers performing on it there. So the idea about this piece is I never clean these floors. So everywhere they go, you have the scuff marks and the use patinas so that these seem like ethnographic objects. And at one point, one of these pieces was purchased by the Dayton Museum and is put in the same room as all the modernist classics. So it was next to a Carl Andre and the Frank Stellas. And in an adjacent room was the African and Asian section, and they had all these ethnographic objects from those countries. And I like the fact that my piece sort of worked between both of those rooms. And I'm just going to show a very small clip. This is a piece that was called A Small World. This was in the Whitney Biennial in 2002. And it's a silent piece that was a collaboration between myself and my friend Jennifer Zakin. I grew up in Los Angeles. Jennifer grew up in Connecticut and New York. So Jennifer is a Jewish woman, and we were both at the Skowhegan residency, and I was doing projects in the woods where I was projecting Super 8 footage that my father made. And she walked by and was like, I have tons of this stuff. And when we both went back to Chicago, we were both at the Art Institute of Chicago, we decided to go through all of hers and all of my reels of this Super 8 footage, and we found, this instance of all these rituals, these middle-class American rituals that were basically identical. So Hanukkah, Christmas, Passover, Easter, fifth-year birthdays, trips to Disneyland, barbecues, and so on. So of course we were basically focusing on the similarities, but upon closer look, we realized that her family had that kind of technology, those kind of cameras, 10 years before my family did. So she had 10 more years of footage before she was even born. And then the other extreme is that anyone who didn't have these cameras has none of this footage. However, even today, anyone who has a camera has the exact same footage. So anyone here probably has the 5th birthday, the uncle with the fly on the nipple, the barbecues, the parties and so on. And so it finally ends with this as a frame of both of us playing piano. And the way we installed this at the Whitney was recreated a 70s living room or family room with the requisite shag carpet, simulated wood panels, love seat, so that people could sit down and become instant family. And the fun thing about this was gradually as this piece got a little bit more popular, the rooms would get crowded and people just start sprawling on the floor and hanging out on the carpet, so it really started to feel like a family room. And then later, it was dubbed the makeout room, because when the high school groups would come through and the room was dark, that's where they would steal their little kisses and so on. So I threw away the couch after. I'm interested in power objects, quote unquote fetish objects. Fetish objects, I think, is a misnomer, but objects that were found in Africa and pre-Columbian societies and so-called primitive, I'd rather say primordial cultures. When the Portuguese and the various colonizers came to these places, they saw this weird relationship that the native folk had with objects and venerated objects. And they called it fetish objects, and later used them as currency. And I often think about every time I go to an art fair or a museum or a gallery that we, in essence, are still looking at fetishized objects. But I also like the notion of them holding power and being power objects. So to that end, I did a project called the Ghetto Bird Tunic. And this is the first one I made. For those of you from the West Coast, you might know the ghetto bird is slang for a police helicopter. And it's called that because in certain neighborhoods, those helicopters are constantly above looking for criminal activity. So I made these as a rite of passage costume. So for young men, they would have to put this on, go out in the street, and camouflage themselves from the glance of the ghetto bird. And if they did that successfully, they then passed that rite of passage and became a man. So I did 3 versions. This is the mid-length for young men. Here's the full length for an older gentleman, a little more sophistication. And I made one for toddlers because you can't really start running from the cops too soon. And for the first one, I put it in the Princeton Museum of Art in the African section. I was asked to be in the show. It was Ellen Harvey, Ann Chu, Ai Weiwei, and myself. And the 4 of us went and did interventions. And I used the pre-Columbian section where I made an Afro pick that went under an Olmec head. I made this. I worked in the Greco-Roman and the Renaissance section. But I'm never really satisfied with just making an object that sits there and does nothing. I have to give it history. I have to give it some type of activity to embed inside of it, to be part of that power and that venerated tradition. So particularly with this coat, I've been using this in performance. where I have friends of mine who are musicians, poets, and so on, wear this coat and do whatever they do. This is Terry Atkins wearing the coat. I did a performance at the kitchen, and as an invocation, Terry is wearing the coat and improvising. And of course, I still make, smaller objects, things that I can do a little quicker in the studio, because as I do large projects, I always have the need of doing something quick that I can see. And I started doing these melted boom boxes a while ago. This one is called The Bridge Is Over, Biddy Bye Bye, which is the name of a classic rap battle between MC Shan and KRS-One, representing the Bronx and Queens, about the origin of hip hop. So essentially, it's a one gesture piece where I get a boombox and I have this sort of complicated way of melting them so that they can still freestand. And this was on view at the Aspen Museum a few years ago in a show that Matt Thompson curated that was about sound, that included objects and performances that, in fact, had no sound. So it just referenced sound. And once again, with the notion of sound, I went back to Japan in 2004 and did a project where I made these Shinto singing bowls. Many of you have seen these. These are used in Shinto and Buddhist altars, where usually you light an incense, strike the bell, and pay homage to past ancestors and so on. I decided to make these bells out of very specific material. I went to pawn shops all through Harlem and got fat gold chains, fat bracelets, rings. Then I went to Tokyo and did the same in all the hip-hop shops there. And then I worked with 4 artisans throughout Tokyo to melt that down into an alloy, form these singing bowls, and then inscribe hip-hop nisasaku, which means in fond memory of hip-hop. And this was sort of, I was foreshadowing the death of hip-hop in around 2004, before it became a popular theme. But I went as far as to take this to a Buddhist temple, a Zen temple, 2 hours outside of Tokyo, where I was doing seated meditation, and did a performance using bells from that temple and around 5 or 6 of the bells that I fabricated. And with 16 other volunteers, we did a bell choir. And this is a video and sound piece that exists on my website, and it's been viewed, put on view before. This was at the Tate Modern. I was telling some of my students about that earlier today, that when it was at the Tate, the video was inside along with the sound, but they also projected the sound outside over the bridge. So as you walk, what is that? Is that Millennium Bridge? Is that what that's called? I can't remember. So as you walk over the bridge, you can hear the bells sort of bringing you towards the museum. And you can see there's still sort of this cross-cultural, syncretic, almost Buddhist theme going through the work, even when it comes down to straight process. This piece right here is a portrait of Jim Kelly, who was Bruce Lee's sidekick, pun intended, in the film Enter the Dragon. And this is around 22 by 30 inches, and it's done with black rice and white rice. Every grain put individually in the exact same direction with tweezers. So it's hard to read by the photograph, but essentially that's how that was made. And I consider that small because later I did a much larger piece, which is 20 feet by 40 feet, and this is all colored sand poured directly on the floor. So if you sneeze, this piece, poof, it's gone. And this was sort of done in the tradition of the Buddhist monks, although I made my own way of actually putting the sand down, still by hand, but I didn't use the same tools. But instead of using a Buddhist icon or symbol, I made a prayer rug. This is fashioned after a 6th century Afghan prayer rug. And this was sort of in response to a lot of the fervor in New York City and anti-Islam sentiment that was happening after 9/11. And it's off the axis of the space because, of course, it has to face Mecca, which then threw it off the architecture of the space. All right, so I'm going to jump way forward to like last October. This piece right here would have been 2004. Okay, let me get out of there before I get stuck in a wormhole. Let's see. Okay. So in September last year, I opened up a 10-year survey at the Brooklyn Museum entitled Sweet Funk and Introspective. And it was a very focused survey show. It was mostly because the Brooklyn Museum purchased one of my major installations. This was a show to put context around that piece. So as an entry into the space, there's a large wall drawing that I call Kalinda, which is named after a dance that slaves used to do, which had coded communication between the beats of their hands clapping and their feet on the ground, of course, both in chains. And slave masters used to let them do this for exercise, but they derived ways of coded communication through the beats and thumps. And it was a way of relaying ideas under the nose, under the eyes of the slave owner. So with that in mind, I started to look back at Andy Warhol and dance notations, and I started to create what I call constellations based on footprints and dance patterns. And the reason I call them constellations is because they emit from this one central point. So the piece is called Kalinda, and in parentheses, Big Ass Bang. So this is sort of how the universe is made. This piece, I think I have a better image of this. This is called Passage. And it's a found bust of Martin Luther King. And it weighs around 200 pounds, cast concrete. I found it at a junk shop in Richmond, Virginia. And it sat in my studio for years, and I had no idea what to do with it until I had a show in Virginia, and I put it in the space. I went to Dwayne Reed, and I got a bunch of hair pomade and Ultra Sheen and Afro Sheen cosmetics, and I made a mohawk around King's head that then went all the way over the nose and over the lips. And with a spotlight that's over here, once it hits the side of Martin Luther King, it casts a shadow of Barack Obama on the wall. And the name Passage, of course, was this. I made this piece literally a week before the inauguration. So it was the idea of this passage of leadership, quote unquote, black leadership, or let's just say American leadership, but also referencing Middle Passage and the North Atlantic slave trade. I'm going to zoom through a bunch of these to get to a couple specific pieces. This right here is called Lotus, and recently I've become interested in taking very horrific symbols from the slave trade, Middle Passage, and American history, and trying to transcend them or subvert them through various means. So this right here is a 7.5-foot diameter disc of glass that is hand etched. And I call it lotus because it sort of resembles a lotus blossom or even the iris of an eye. But when you get closer, you realize that each of those petals are actually hand etched versions of slave ships. And these were passed around in slave manuals to show how to best pack your human cargo. And I think the maximum that you can get without losing too many by just straight sanitation issues was around 360. So per petal on this piece, there's around 360 bodies. So there's over 6,000 hand-etched figures in this piece. And this is it hanging in the Rubin Museum, which is a Buddhist museum in New York. And for me, this was very satisfying because, of course, I'm referring to the lotus, which, as you know, sort of comes from the muck and mire to blossom into this beautiful thing on top of a pond or a lake. So it has this transformative element, but then again, it has this horrific past and history. So it's very seductive, and it's a slow reveal. And then I was later commissioned by the city of New York to do a large one on the side of a high school in the Bronx. So this is a 30-foot version of it, and this is all done in steel. And this is to give you a little scale of how large it is. And another symbol I've been playing with is the Cheshire grin. I call it a Cheshire grin because I show this often in Europe and other places. So I reference Lewis's Alice in Wonderland Cheshire cat. But of course, when I show this in the US, particularly in the South, it becomes blackface minstrelsy. And considering that it's hanging from a tree, it goes back into this whole sort of tradition of strange fruits and black bodies hanging. And I think it's really packed and sort of heavy, but at the same time light and a little bit sinister. And this is shown in what I call its natural habitat, hanging from a tree. This is along the side of the Black Forest when I was doing a residency in Germany. And it operates. And I use that as a main character in a video that maybe I can show a small clip. I also do a half version that I call a smirk. And the lights cycle on, but then they go off, so it essentially disappears and reappears. But I shine the floor directly in front of it, so when it does finally, the lights come back on, it creates a full smile that then disappears again. This is the centerpiece of that show, and this is called Blossom. And the sound you're hearing is the actual sound of the piano playing itself as you walk into the space. So, in other words, this is a piano that's been retrofitted into a player piano, and it's playing my version of various jazz and gospel improvisations. Sorry, I'm moving a little fast because I think we're getting close. Okay, yes, the tree is fabricated, and this piece was inspired by the Gina 6 incident that happened in Gina, Louisiana, I think in 2008, where at a supposedly integrated high school, a black kid wanted to go sit under the tree where all the popular white kids were sitting. And he asked the teacher if he could do it, and the teacher was like, of course, why are you even asking me? Go ahead, sit under the tree. And as soon as he did, gradually the white students started to leave. And when everyone would return to school the next day, there were nooses hanging from the tree. And this started a whole series of events that ultimately ended up with the arrest of 4 or 5 black kids because they were going to a corner store one day and they were confronted by a few white students. The white students pulled out a gun. The black kids and the white kids fought. The black kids got the gun, and the white kids ran off. The cops came and arrested the black kids because they stole the gun. And then after that, there was a whole mass migration to Gina, Louisiana. It was in the news. It was a big deal. People were going there and, protesting this whole event. So that's where the tree comes from, because once again, it reminds me of lynching in the South and how that sort of tradition is still there. And also, the flip side, the tree is where the Buddha finds enlightenment. So once again, through this horrific event, he's trying to find a way of, there's the yin and yang of all things. And so the tree is the stand-in for the body, and that body is singing, lamenting. And as you can see right here, the stool is kicked over as if somebody might have been lynched and had the stool kicked from under them. So in the museum, way above it, you see the Cheshire Grin. And I'm going to zoom to something else. This was a show at the Sculpture Center called Cosmic Voodoo Circus. And this goes in a different direction, but it was at the exact same time as the Brooklyn show. So it sort of shows 2 different visions that I've been working with. And I'm still playing with the idea of a fetish figure, but taking it further and actually making it look like a sexually fetishized figure, laced in, red vinyl and hot sticky and, all that kind of connotation. But this is an idea of how big the piece really is. It's actually, the figure is around 16, 17 feet tall, and the canopy goes up to 22 feet tall. And in the background is the Cheshire Grin. I was commissioned to do a billboard in LA for Undefeated Shoe Store. Gary did one of these as well a few years before I did. And this was, as you drive down La Brea in Los Angeles, you would see this billboard of this smiling face. No other information, and it was just there glaring at you. So I had that billboard sent to New York, and then I hung it from one point in the space near the door, so when the wind blows, that piece is swinging around and very dangerous and just sort of bumping against that wall behind it. And then I've started messing around with stars, once again playing with the idea of the heavens and the earth, and the mandala, of course, being a portal into other universes. Afrofuturism was mentioned, and I'll explain that in a second. But I've been looking at the idea of fallen stars and narcissism via the internet and the cult of celebrity, and all the various associations you can make with a mirror. And as you walk around these pieces on the floor, of course, they're jagged and dangerous, and you look right down into it, and you see yourself broken and fragmented. Once again, picture for scale. And with these star pieces, I usually have hidden lights that shoot directly on them. And then, of course, it reflects the stars up against the walls and the ceiling, so you have this sort of star chamber effect that happens. Very low budget, but it's a way of filling space without filling space. And this brings us up to the show that I just opened in Mass Mocha, in the very large cavernous space there. And this is called the Cartographer's Conundrum. And one of the, I mentioned Afrofuturism, and the most succinct way I can explain this notion to you is a way of understanding the history of the African diaspora through technology, science fiction, music, literature, and in the process, redefining, rewriting that history, looking past the pathology and the weight and gravity of that history and finding other ways to associate it and move beyond it. So to that end, I returned to making another floor piece, and this floor piece was actually 3,600 square feet. And these are hand-cut diamonds that create this sort of illusionist geometric pattern. And strewn throughout the place are found instruments, an organ, saxophone and its case, the insides of a piano back here, a piano bench, and you'll see how that goes through the rest of the space in a second. I also put gels against some of the windows, so as the sunlight goes through this space and arcs throughout the course of a day, the course of a month, the course of a year, you get different colored patterns intersecting the colored patterns on the floor. So it really plays with geometry and modernism. And there's no coincidence that in the adjacent room is where the large Saul DeWitt exhibition is that's been there, that will be there for 20 years. So, once again, using more of these stars. Most people, when they use this mass MoCA space, they try to close it off and contain it because it is just too immense to deal with. But I wanted to take that challenge on and leave the windows wide open, deal with the sunlight, and find ways to play with it. So in essence, I want to even expand the space more through illusionistic references with the floor patterns and with these stars that are reflecting various parts of the architecture, which in essence expand the space. Now towards the far end of the space are church pews. Sorry, I have to rush to it, okay. Church pews that I found in the back building of Mass MoCA. And I bolted some of them on the floor and then fabricated several out of plexiglass that start to ascend throughout the space. And once again, the sunlight goes through those plexiglass pews and shoots different glints of light and color pattern throughout the whole space, once again, sort of illuminating and expanding it. And at the very end is an organ on its back with pipe organs that are either imploding or exploding from it, and a levitating piano. From there, you walk into a small room, which is filled with a large video installation. I've been working on a 3-part Odyssean trilogy of videos. The first one I shot in Stuttgart, Germany. The second one, which is this one, was shot in Bahia, Salvador da Bahia in Brazil. And the third one will be shot in Ghana and Ethiopia next year. I don't think we'll have time to watch that clip, but I'll just show you how I installed it in this space. And the basic premise of the trilogy, the one that starts in Germany, is a circus performer who is riding the train. He is actually a Brazilian expat living in Germany, been there for 25 years or so. And as he's riding the train, he's putting on clown makeup and taking it off, basically changing his identity every few minutes and then taking it off, not satisfied with it. And by the end of that video, he has a breakdown and ends up meditating under that smiling Cheshire grin under the tree. And then he's bound to it in this bondage rope. It's a lot, okay. So the second part goes into Brazil, where he then transcends being this clown and becomes a sort of non-gender specific Tropicalia, Ziggy Stardust character with silver face paint, body paint, hands. His dreadlocks are now silver, and he's got stacked boots that are around 5 inches, and they go all the way up his thigh, metallic. Maybe we'll show you a picture of that soon. But as you walk through the space, I have these 2 video projectors that project the image on both sides. And you have to literally walk through these 2 to get through the other side of the room. This is looking at the video straight on without the architecture in the way. And as you get through this room, you go upstairs. And the centerpiece of the exhibition to me is actually this painting by my cousin, John Biggers, who is very well known, although deceased, muralist, who operated largely out of Houston, Texas, but also Hampton, Virginia, and North Carolina. And this piece is called The Quilting Party, and this is one of his epic murals from 1981. And I've recreated it here on canvas, and a lot of the themes, I think I have a picture. The themes in this piece, that was the actual size of it, so, you know, mural size. There's a lot of geometry. There's, in my opinion, Afrofuturist references going through geometry, archaeology, architecture, sound, musical instruments, and then references to the South between pots and row houses that he then also incorporates into that geometric matrix. Now, I think it's important that this piece is called The Quilting Party because the most recent show that I opened in Florida are large-scale drawings that I've been doing on repurposed quilts. And here's one of them in the back. And this sort of sums up the whole show. I think this pattern is called, I want to say it's called Star Chamber or Star, can't remember the name right now. But what I've drawn right here is this golden figure, which is a graphic representation of a harmonic fifth in music, which is a perfect sound. And right here is a patch that I make that is that lotus diagram that I showed you before. These are stitched directly onto the quilts. I hand paint this, and then I mark out parts and then spray paint, going back to growing up in LA and doing graffiti. I spray paint onto these quilts as well. And this is an overhead view of the entire installation that you see. Once you look at the quilting party mural, you turn right around and this is your view. And I'm gonna zoom really quickly through the show in Florida right now, and these are the drawings, the quilt drawings. So the show in Boston, Massachusetts leads up to the show in Florida. And I'll just rush. These are just a bunch of quilts. I'll talk sort of generally about the references. You see the footprints already. You've seen the lotus. And I was talking about geometry and illusion. I love these quilts, but the patterns still remain very flat. So what I try to do is intervene and create depth and geometry in the existing pattern of the quilt. So all this is hand-drawn. Once again, another lotus. And then references to Buddhist representations of waves, clouds, and nature. Many of you who visit New York and who've been to the Red Rooster have probably seen this. Marcus Samuelson handpicked this one to go by the bar at the Red Rooster. Here's another lotus, which I've actually scumbled out with oil stick. And I've started sewing on different fabric. I've spent some time in Kentucky at the Kentucky Derby and was really interested in the fashion and the dandyism there. So I started getting seersucker fabric and sewing that directly onto the quilts. Then once again using the Tibetan and Japanese graphic of waves and clouds. And then this circular globe with stars came off of a 1970s album that I had by a group called Quasar. And then there's the spray painted triangle to, play with that depth. This is a hand-drawn version of the lotus. Once again, an intervention with a different piece of fabric onto the quilt and a Cheshire grin that's then painted over and a lotus blossom down beneath.
What's the size of it?
The smallest would be probably 4 feet by 5 feet, and then 5 by 5, then 6 by 6, 6 by 7. So these are medium to large size quilts. Some of them, I should mention, are pre-Civil War quilts, so they have a lot of history. And my dear friend and local, part-time local, Rebecca Donaldson, has generously given me some of the quilts from her old collection, and I've been morphing them, so I don't know if she's here yet, but she should recognize several of these. And floating throughout the space are clouds, and I've been making these clouds recently, and very simply, they're just raw cotton around an armature and floating in space. And once again, I like this idea of cotton that really came from the blood, sweat, and tears of so many people. And if anyone who's ever tried to take cotton from a bud, they know exactly how painful that can be. But then once they're floating in space, they have all these references of light, fluffy, pure, clean. And I think once again, that's sort of the dichotomy of American history. So strewn throughout are all these floating clouds, and these quilts are floating amongst them as well, also made of cotton. This is on view right now at the Ringling Museum in Sarasota, and it's up till October. The show at Mass MoCA is also up till October, so I think those definitely feed off of each other. And I think we are close to probably over time. I don't know if you want to, what you want to do, but.
Thank you.